on behalf of Product People. Product People is a product management consultancy based in Berlin, Germany, and we try to help companies discover and deliver great products. And we also do this community builder, which has the mission of supporting other product people within their product journeys. If you like our events and come regularly, then please consider also joining our Patreon or contributing to our Patreon. These are some of the clients that we've helped in the past and are currently also engaged with. So how do we do this? We generally do it in kind of two stages. One is the bulk of our work, which is interim product management that we go on site, or not on site anymore really, but we work kind of embedded as a freelance or interim product manager owner within a project or within a team. And then, our other big component is this community that you are currently a part of. Now, I guess that was the last slide. So today we have the pleasure of welcoming Janna Bastow. Probably needs no introduction to most of you. Currently CEO and co-founder of ProdPad, but also co-founder of Product Tank and Mind the Product. And she's here today to talk, to share about lean road mapping and OKRs. So Janna, it's all yours.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for the warm intro. And thanks so much for having me. It's great to, as I said, great to get a chance to meet product people from all around the world. Let me share my screen, and that way you can follow along with my talk today about road mapping and OKRs, which essentially are a couple of things that I'm constantly talking about, because I think it's a couple of things that product managers are always working on and judged on, and are a couple of things that can be most impactful for product managers, right? It's the one of the key things that can help you focus your team on their objectives and help move your team towards a leaner way of working. And we're going to be talking about how you can move away from the timeline way of working, date-driven ways of working, and move your team towards a more lean way of working, and how that works with OKRs. So just a quick intro, because I know Clyde already did an intro there. So one thing to point out is that I'm a product person at heart. I was a product manager before I did all the other stuff that Clyde talked about. I've done tons of mentoring and training and consulting in the product space. I've led product teams, and as you said, I'm one of the founders of Mind the Product, which is the big global community and series of events and training for product people. And I'm also one of the founders of ProdPad, which is software for product managers, and it has tools to help you manage a lean roadmap and OKRs. But I used to have really bad roadmap habits myself. And this is actually an example of one of my old roadmaps from years ago, where I faithfully reproduced the feature wish list of one of my, essentially what the company wanted at that time. So I could turn it into this timeline roadmap that I could present to our team and to our board. And you know what? This is exactly what you see when you look for roadmap templates. And when you look at most roadmaps, this is a screen grab from a Google image search result for product roadmap, like just a couple months ago. And this is how, I've done research into how thousands of product people do their roadmaps. And this is how product people still do their roadmaps today. And it's somewhat the fault of the people that we work for, because it's our bosses and our execs who are asking product people to make roadmaps full of features and dates and promises, and then put pressure on us to deliver, as if we as product people can absolve them from the bad decisions that they've made about their business model and the resources that they have. And then when the roadmap fails, if we don't deliver it, it looks bad on the product manager, looks bad on us. But it's usually not the product manager who has a say in what goes into those failing roadmaps, right? So no wonder that the product manager as a role was once called one of the unhappiest jobs in America. It's a tough role. So what's going on in these failing roadmaps? Well, this is actually how a lot of roadmaps look today. And I know that this format makes you look great at some points. Your board and your bosses love when you can give them this level of certainty, but it sets you up for failure because if you deconstruct this format of the roadmap, you essentially get a chart that maps out time versus things to do, right? You have time on this x-axis and it creates this timeline, which at first it seems pretty easy and intuitive to use, especially in the short term. But the further out you plan and the more you put out on there, the harder it becomes to manage. And because that timeline sits at the top, always marching forward, no matter what you put on the roadmap, everything always includes a due date and a time estimate just by having this format of the roadmap. And you end up with a big pile of features and a big pile of deadlines, and it's all based on this big pile of assumptions. And assumptions are dangerous. You know, the first assumption that you've made with this format is that you know how long each of these is going to take. And this might be easy for the stuff that you've broken down in more detail and had the developers give some estimates. But the further down the list you go, the less clarity you've actually got. And you're also assuming that nothing else is going to come in and mess up your timeline. You know, no changes in the market, no new competitors, no fresh ideas coming from customers, no need for iteration, which in this day and age, we know that this is never true. Something will come in and disrupt your timeline. And you're also assuming that each of these features is going to work perfectly as soon as they launch. You know, so if you put 3 weeks in to build that new checkout feature, that new checkout page, that feature, then at the end of those 3 weeks, it should be converting exactly as well as expected. And then you're free to move on to the next thing. Except oftentimes it doesn't convert exactly as well as expected, and you need to go back and fix it. But you can't because you've already allotted the next chunk of time to something else. And by explicitly adding these features to the timeline, you're assuming that each of these features should definitely exist, that they form part of the strategy and therefore should be codified. And at the end of the day, you're making one big, dangerous assumption, is that nothing is going to change. And so what could go wrong? Well, you end up with these made-up release dates that force your developers on stressful marches to launch on time that essentially give your sales and customers expectations that you can't meet, all while often missing opportunities in the market and often downright building the wrong things and often stacking up your tech stack with tech debt. And this leads to you being a sad product manager. So, is there a better way? Well, yeah, of course there is. That's what I'm here to talk to you about. This is where lean road mapping comes into play. Now, lean is all about the build, measure, learn cycle. And the key bit here is the learn part. Now, this is essential to the benefits of the lean movement. Lean is all about less wasted resources and less risk. It's about learning quickly with as little cost as possible in order to reduce that wastage and to eliminate any unnecessary risk. And this is where your roadmap can help you, because your roadmap is a tool that can actually help you learn and iterate, but at the product strategy level. And this is where I'd actually take that analogy a little bit further. You can put that more succinctly and say that your roadmap is a prototype for your strategy. Now, prototyping is such a healthy activity. You know, when you build a new feature, you don't run straight in with some fully designed interface that you pulled out of your brain and put together and handed straight over to development to go build. You start with, usually, some basic sketch on a piece of paper or a whiteboard, or that you put together in Sketch or Figma or something like that. And you take that sketch and you show it to a colleague or a customer, and they give you some feedback. Maybe they tell you to move that button here, add some copy here, something that helps make it more obvious or clarifies what it is you're supposed to do. And it just helps you, make that design more solid, more likely to solve the problem that you were going to, that you're hoping that it was going to solve. And that first sketch gets thrown out, and you make a slightly better one. You take on board the feedback that you learned from, and you repeat over and over until you're reasonably sure that you understand how that feature is going to solve the problems at hand. And road mapping can be similar. Honestly, if each of you walked out of here and started your first roadmap like this, I'd be proud. It shouldn't be pretty. It shouldn't be slick. What you're really doing is saying, as a product person, I've listened to all the stakeholders around me and I've heard a series of problems and I've interpreted it as this. I think we should tackle this, problem 1, and then this, problem 2, and then this, problem 3. What do you think? Right? Really basic, really simple. Take these assumptions that you're making to a colleague and check their opinion. If they agree, you might be on the right track. If they point out holes in the plan, then you can start to make adjustments. Maybe you need to add in new problems or other things that you hadn't thought of to capture, or change the order of things, or perhaps something you'd outlined as a problem isn't actually a big deal and can be removed. Just start off with something really basic. Here's a slightly more practical example, especially in this more remote world. This is something you could do in Miro. Again, you're not looking for pretty, you're looking for something that just takes things out of your brain and lays out your assumptions. Get your colleagues to weigh in on stuff, check your assumptions. Ultimately, what you're doing is it's going to lead you to a stronger and more cohesive strategy that actually helps to solve key problems for the business and has fewer blind spots. And you really can, and I encourage you to start your roadmap really simple. There's a concept I call roadmap bankruptcy, and it's actually really freeing. If you've got a really junk roadmap, something that's just full of a whole bunch of assumptions and deadlines and things that may or may not ever be done or need to be done, just push it all to the side and start with fresh eyes. Throw out your old roadmap and start again. Go through the process of recreating and checking your assumptions with colleagues and customers and get an idea as to what should be on there. And then go back and compare to your old roadmap. You might find that there's actually a whole bunch of stuff that didn't actually make it back onto this new roadmap. Maybe that's stuff that doesn't actually have to be done anyways. And if you just avoided a whole bunch of work, there's nothing more lean than that. It's really important to remember this. I always tell product people this. It's not your job to have all the answers. As product people, you're supposed to know less than your colleagues. They're the experts of their domain, whether it's of the tech, the marketing, customer-facing domain, whatever sort of area that they're on. Your job as a product person is to surround yourself with these experts to ask the best questions. Your job is to guide on a solid road mapping process. And by doing so, it's one of the most impactful things you can do to set a strong company strategy. Because what you're actually doing is getting their understanding into the strategy, using their collective knowledge to help build up the strategy, and letting their expertise shine through. And it's a way to de-risk your business. Essentially what you're doing is, this is the lean way. You're checking your assumptions about future problems way in advance. Just like when you're prototyping on an interface, you're learning early on. Now, it's also important to remember that product is a big unknown. You're building into uncharted territory. There's no blueprint to follow. There's no right way to do this. It's not like you're building a prefab house, which is really just about gathering materials and snapping it all together in a series of steps. It's more like landing in a new unknown shore and knowing that you want to get to that, that big gold-topped mountain in the distance, but you don't know the best path and you have to pick out the best path to get there. And you have certain resources with you now, and you'll probably pick up some more resources and knowledge along the way. And it's up to you and your team to survey your surroundings and to figure out which way you're going to go and solve problems as you run into them. Each product is a unique journey. And this is where the concept of horizons come in. So you're standing here at the present time, or what we'd call now, and you can see what's keeping your team busy right now and what problems are in front of you. And you can see off into the distance as well. And in the now, if you landed in the new shore, on some new shore and immediately saw there was a bear in front of you, like that's your first problem to solve. You would see that it's crystal clear. And unless someone sees a bigger, different problem, you better start thinking of ways to solve that problem, right? But you also might see way off into the distance, right? That big mountain that you need to go conquer. Maybe there's some challenges that need to be solved there, like keeping warm or ice climbing gear, but those are too specific right now. You just want to keep people pointed at get up the mountain, that kind of granularity, so that they can start thinking about ways that they will tackle that when they get there and keep pointing towards the mountain. But you don't need to start breaking that down in too much detail yet because it's off in the distance. But you can also see into the middle distance as well, with various levels of degree, depending on how well equipped you are and what your starting position is. And you might spot opportunities to take advantage that will help you take advantage of various opportunities along the way, or problems that you need to overcome or avoid on the way. Maybe there's a glistening city full of money and resources that you could reach, or maybe there's a bog that you need to get over. And your job as a product person is to figure out of all the different multiple paths and from where you're standing, which one is the best one. You don't know which is the best one. There might be multiple paths through. Maybe you build a bridge in one direction or tunnel your way through the other way, right? There's a bunch of different ways to dig through here. But again, you can't just whip out your phone and pull up Google Maps. This is uncharted territory. No one has ever built your product before. There is no right answer, but some answers are going to be better than others. And the best answers come from the teams who lay out what they see on the road ahead and regularly regroup to make sure that they're still on the best path. And these time horizons translate to a product roadmap. So instead of a timeline, which is a single date-driven line that marches forward, think in terms of these three buckets. You've got your now, which is granular about your focus and your scope. This is the stuff that's being prototyped, tested, and built right now. And the later column is less about specific initiatives and more about outlining the problems that you think need to be solved in order to fulfill your vision. Now, if you set off on a journey like this, you can imagine a team might start immediately bickering because they haven't yet agreed on what they're trying to achieve. They all know that they want to reach the summit, but they have no framework for measuring their success. And therefore, to know what they're actually working on, whether it's actually the right things, you need to give them some sort of objectives. They need to be given some sort of guardrails. Road mapping without objectives can be chaos. And this is where setting objectives, or OKRs, comes in. OKR stands for objectives and key results. And just to give a high-level view as to what this means, the concept of it is that the company sets the top-level objectives, often called the North Star metric, and then the team works together to decide how they can help contribute to that goal. And this is vastly different than the old school way of doing management, where you think of the management setting goals for each team and then micromanaging progress. It means that it's using the knowledge of the whole team to set goals, which means that gaps are more naturally spotted and filled. The team can work more autonomously and isn't held up by limitations in knowledge or time that might be caused by any sort of bottlenecks in middle or top management. I often think about it like that scene in the Fellowship of the Ring, when they've got that huge task of getting to Mordor. So they've got to get that ring to Mordor. And they're standing there, and one of them says, well, you can have my sword. This is my skill. One of them says, well, you can have my bow. And the other one says, you can have my axe. And they all look around at what they could contribute and offered up what they could until all the gaps were filled and they had enough resources to set off on the journey. They didn't have somebody at the top saying, we need one of each of these things. They figured out amongst themselves what skills they could bring and set off and were able to solve the problem. Likewise, when you're setting a company goal of, let's say, maximizing revenue from a market segment, your team is each stepping in with things like marketing will attract the right sorts of customers. Design might say, will make a delightful onboarding that converts and retains. And development might say, well, we'll build a solid platform and deliver in a way so that we can iterate often. Now, no one person or no one team is responsible for that North Star, but the whole team together makes it happen. An objective should be these high level and qualitative. Think of it as this goal that you want to achieve in the future. They should set clear direction and provide that motivation. It's helpful to ask the question, how do we know we're successful? What things should we see are moving if we're doing a good job? And you might have them at the company level and at the product level. If your company basically is a product, then they might be essentially the same thing. But if you have like a service wing and a product wing, then you might have completely separate ones, depending on how you've divvied these up. But the key thing is that having objectives are essential. If you're in a position to set objectives, make sure you're taking the time to set and communicate them. If you're in a company that lacks clear objectives, call this out. Point out that you can't effectively help the business hit their goals if you don't know what they are. Vision is essential too. Your team needs to understand which hill in the distance they're aiming for so they can aim vaguely in the right direction. What's your gold summit in the distance? If you don't have a clear product or company vision, stop right now and get that sorted. You should all be able to talk about your vision, and everyone in your team should be able to talk about that. So this is a vision template that you can use. You might recognize it from Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm. What I like about it is it asks the right sort of questions, like who are you building for, and what problem does it solve, and how does it differentiate you? We've got this template up on this page here. If you want to go check it out, there's even a link to an interactive version of it that you can use to play around with it and copy it over to your own for your own uses. And so once you have that, you've got your vision, you've got some objectives, and you've got a starting point in terms of your visibility where you are now into the near term and your future time horizons. So we can start putting that together into our lean product roadmap. And each of these blocks here is an initiative or a problem to be solved, and each one is linked to the objectives. And this is one popular configuration that you might see, and another layout that's pretty similar, but groups cards by objective, right? So you might have revenue type stuff and user growth type stuff, or however you might want to group these. But I also want to talk about another piece here, which is the key results, the other half of OKRs. Key results are the specific measurable pieces of objectives. So what you're actually looking for are things that are time-bound and measurable. But you've got objectives and key results. So what makes you successful and how you're measuring that success, OKRs. But what's often happening, what's often missing is what we call initiatives. It seems to be this forgotten middle child in the world of OKRs. And perhaps that's because OKRs doesn't have a good ring to it. An initiative describes the specific activities or projects that the team is working on to influence the success of an OKR. This is why they're so important. Even if you identify what you need to achieve, as in the objective, based on the company strategy, and determine what good looks like, which is the key result, you're not going to get very far if you're unable to clearly communicate the actions you plan to take in order to get there, which is the initiative. So let's use this example. You want to improve your overall health to avoid illness or injury. That's an objective. And you might have a key result. You're measuring progress by saying, I want to lose 15 pounds by the end of the year. Okay, and you might have other measures of success as well, captured as other key results. For this one key result, though, you're not going to just lose weight by willing it away. Something has to happen. So you might set an initiative to introduce regular exercise to your schedule, the thing that will actually be done. And you might also refactor your diet and start eating well. And chances are you're going to have to make progress on both of these initiatives to hit your goal. And within each initiative, there's probably a number of things that you can try, all of which are going to take some time to see some results from. And the reason why having initiatives in here is important is that it helps solve that problem of OKR drift. A lot of OKR systems miss initiatives. They just have OKRs. And what tends to happen is that you set up your OKRs in one place, and then you go off and do your day-to-day work in another place. And what happens is that those OKRs get forgotten about. When the team goes back to update them at the end of the month or the end of the quarter, the OKRs aren't as relevant anymore, as the team's been learning and iterating over in the product space and hasn't been looking at the tracking space, right? They haven't been looking at their OKRs. And it's one of the reasons OKRs often fail in teams. I regularly hear people saying things like, the OKRs don't represent the stuff that I work on every day, or we move so fast that the OKRs can't keep up. Now, OKRs are usually time-based, which a lot of people find weird because the roadmap is not, but it actually works out really well. See, with an OKR system, you're basically saying, Here's what we think is going to make a difference to the company right now. So let's work on maximizing those. Later, you'll find that you have new objectives as old problems are solved or become irrelevant. So usually you'll see things like OKRs managed on a yearly and quarterly cadence. Now, key thing is that good objectives should leave enough room for interpretation. So put it this way, if you land on a new shore and the crew is tasked with finding food for the night, that's achievable. Maybe they go hunting, or maybe they go foraging, maybe they set up traps. As long as you're not picky, you get fed. But if you said the objective was to get a steak dinner, then the team's probably going to miss out on great opportunities for other edible options, and everyone goes hungry. And this is one of the big gotchas of OKRs. It becomes this tool to micromanage with, right? You get the bosses at the top saying, yes, we're going to tell you that the objectives are to get a steak dinners, and they don't actually allow the people who can see the options around them find the best ways to use their skills to find the best ways to solve the problems that have been outlined for them. So there should be enough room for creativity and interpretation and find the best paths forward. And your roadmap can be used to help you guide with things like experimentation and validation. So with experimentation, you can include that directly in your roadmap itself. So each card is a problem to be solved and tied to an objective. And then each card is connected to a list of experiments that could be run in order to solve that problem and impact that objective. So your roadmap can give you that overview of progress on ongoing objectives and which things are working and which things aren't. So each of these cards essentially is an initiative, and you can see what things are actually working and what's not. And once a project is done in development, don't just throw these results out or tuck them away somewhere you're never going to find them again. A habit that I see all the time, it's a really bad habit, is that when you release something, so you close all the tickets in Jira, you crumple up all the Post-it notes on the wall, and you start moving on to the next thing. Because it looks good for your cadence, but it's bad for making sure that you're actually making an impact. You know, just because something was launched doesn't mean it solved the problem you wanted it to. So you should build in the time and space to validate the work that's being done. You know, it's not that people don't understand it's important to move the right metrics. It's just that they often don't have that space, that permission to stop and do the measurements. And so your lean roadmap can help you here too. If you build in some sort of validation roadmap or completed roadmap. And so, you know, track what's released and when, and outline the results. Did it solve the problem you hoped it would? Did it move the KPI and did it move the KR and the metrics that you're hoping it would? So by building in this validation into your roadmap, you create a space to show the value of the work done. And fundamentally, the value of this roadmap format when paired with objectives is that it takes the focus off building features and hitting delivery dates and helps your team strive towards solving problems for your customers and for your business. Just a quick word here is we've just launched this brand new guide. It's called How to Ditch Your Timeline Roadmap. So if you want to hear more about how to step away from a timeline roadmap and what's wrong with it, and a few other notes on that, then jump in, grab a copy of that. And in the meantime, I'm happy to answer questions.
Great. Thank you. I don't know if maybe you want to throw the link into the chat so that people can check it out, or I don't know how.
Yeah. Ooh, I can't copy the link from that. I will get the link into the chat. Let me do that.
Cool.
Cool. All right. And I can't see if there's any questions, but everybody jump in, leave your questions, or let me know if there are any. I'm just trying to find the chat.
Yeah, so thanks again. And we are now open for questions. So feel free to, if you're in the Zoom, feel free to shout out. You're also welcome to write into the chat, and we'll also be taking questions from our streaming sites. So please have at it. Oh, wow, okay. So we've already got a couple comments. Davide says, thank you, Janna. I really like this approach, and I've always tried to push this way in the companies that I've worked for. And
Great.
there's the link for everyone. We have a question from YouTube. Peter asks, OKRs are typically created per quarter for us. Do I understand correctly that you think this should stop?
No, OKRs make sense on a quarterly cadence. As to whether quarterly makes sense or not, I mean, why a quarter? It's an arbitrary amount of time, but it is generally seen as enough time to get going with initiatives and not so much time that you can spend too much time on things. So it is generally good practice to think about OKRs for a quarter. What's good about OKRs is what you're essentially doing is the company is saying, the business is able to say, we have these problems, right? With this North Star problem, North Star objective that we're going for, and then we have these other problems that sort of come out of there. And let's say the objective that's important to us right now is we want to get the conversion rate up. Okay, great. And what you're actually doing, what the business is actually doing is saying, for this quarter, we want you to spend as much of your time as possible getting this conversion rate up. And they're not telling you how to do that, but it is time bound. So the business is able to commit how much effort they're putting towards solving this problem. Now, let's say a team costs $1 million a year or €1 million per year, whatever. Therefore, it's $250,000 per quarter. So they can then budget and say that they're going to put $250,000 towards this particular problem. So to the finance people, it makes sense to them. What you're then doing as a product team is saying, we're not going to tell you exactly which features we're going to launch and when, because frankly, you're going to lose a lot of time in the whole planning and we're going to get it all wrong anyways. You're actually going to get a lot more out of us if we actually just say, we're going to run as many experiments as possible for the quarter, right? And last quarter, we were able to run 50 experiments. And in those 50 experiments, we were able to move the, you wanted us to get churn down. So we got the churn goal from here to here, and we fixed that. That's what you got for your $250,000. Now you want us to get conversion rate up. That's what we're going to do for this quarter. So we're going to run maybe 50 experiments. We don't know how many it's going to be. We don't know which ones are going to be. We don't know how long it's going to take us, but we do know that we're going to work together as a team to ask the right questions, to spend the best time on the best possible things. And by the end of the quarter, almost guaranteed, you're going to see the numbers moving in the right direction. And that's considerably more powerful than standing at the beginning of the quarter or at the beginning of the year trying to guess what things are going to make an impact, because you waste so much time trying to lock all that down up ahead of time that you end up actually delivering way less than a team who's actually lean. So quarterly cadence is actually really good, because what actually happens at the end of that quarter, let's say you spend and you do, 40 experiments, and the number goes up a little bit, the company can then say, okay, great, you made some progress on this. We now think that the most important problem now is to boost revenue from this market. So they change the objective, and you go spend the next quarter doing as many experiments as you can. Maybe you do 50 experiments, maybe you do 35, right? Whatever it is. But maybe they say, actually, that same objective of getting that conversion rate up is still the most important to us. We're going to do another quarter of that. And they can choose to make that investment decision based on that. But what you're actually doing is allowing them to say what their problems are, and then they're allowing you to break that down into a lean way of working, which actually provides the best of both worlds for both the management as well as the tactical teams.
Cool, thanks. There's a couple similar questions, so I'm going to group them. Problem which makes Davide a sadder, even sadder PM is that from the C level, this type of work, this way of working isn't accepted or was not accepted. Any advice on how to convince a company to adopt this framework?
Yes. All right. So it depends, because you've got different types of stakeholders. One heartening thing is that I have seen now literally thousands of teams move over from timeline forms to lean forms. It's really important to find out why your company is hanging on to the old way of road mapping, because they'll hold on to it for various different reasons. Sometimes they're holding on to it because they think it's more effective. They think it's actually making you work faster, because it does sort of give that feeling, right? If somebody comes to you and says, we're going to go deliver this stuff, as a manager, it gives you this feeling of, oh, great, I just have to let you go do this stuff now. But what you're actually missing as a manager is the fact that, what they've done is they've added a whole bunch of buffer to that time. They're actually delivering less than a team who is lean, and it's actually costing you more. So, if you point out the reality to some of these businesses saying, well, actually, you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck. You're going to get a better return on investment for your team if you let us work in a lean way. And this isn't a new concept, right? This lean thing has been out for years. So you can look at hundreds of case studies of companies who've worked in more lean ways and how they've been able to outperform companies who are much more waterfall driven, and show those types of case studies. Perhaps it's because your company is sales driven or more of an agency style thing, right? You've got a series of contracts and pre-sold like configurations that you've sold to customers. In those cases, it's often worth pointing out what's actually happening in your business, because it's actually really unhealthy for the business, and unless they've actually equipped themselves to work as an agency. Now, the thing is, think about the time that you have as a team. You can spend time in delivery mode or in discovery mode, and most teams are somewhere along the way, right? Maybe you're 50% delivery and 50% discovery, or 80-20, or 80-20 the other way. If you are spending most of your time just focusing on delivery, as in, you sold the month of March and April to one customer, and you sold the month of May to another customer, and you sold the month of July to another customer, because they've asked for custom work. They said one more feature and we'll buy, or, ooh, wouldn't it be great if we had this one upgrade, or, whatever else. In those cases, what you're actually running into are teams where they don't have enough time left to do any discovery. So you're just constantly building for this one-off customer. And if you're constantly building for one-off customers, you're never actually figuring out what the bigger, juicier problems are to solve for the wider world. Now, there's no problem with making money as an agency. That's essentially what it is, right? But what you're actually doing is you're selling your time for money. And you can only ever scale so much, right? Because if you're selling your time for money, you can only ever scale as much as your team is. So if you want to make twice as much profit, you have to have twice the size team. Whereas if you're discovering interesting products, which often means delaying your profits, right? So it often means not necessarily selling the month to a customer. It means saying no to customers and figuring out more interesting solutions that you don't get instantly paid for. But if you find value that you've created, you can sell that for 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, right? This is why agencies only ever grow like this, and product companies are the ones that do this, right? So if your company has designs on ever doing this, then it has to find a way to get away from acting like an agency company. If it is going to act like an agency company and just sell one month after the other to clients, then it has to price appropriately, add some zeros to that to make sure that they're selling their time for enough to justify it. The worst thing a company can do is sell its time and price as if it's a product company. I have seen, and I've been part of companies that have met their fate because of this type of activity. But oftentimes the business doesn't see it because short-term cash looks really good and really tasty when somebody says, hey, look, I'll give you 50 grand to go solve this problem for me next month. It's really hard to turn down. So find out why the business is trying to tie you down to date-driven ways, and figure out how to push back on it. I've actually written an article which is tackles all the different ways that different stakeholders will ask for, why different stakeholders will ask for a time-driven roadmap and how to push back on them. So if you like, drop me an email. I'll go to the next slide. Either find me on Twitter, I'm simply Bastow, or drop me an email, and I'll drop you the link to that. and happy to send that over to you, because it goes quite details. It's like, is it your customers? Is it your investors? Is it your marketing team? Is it your sales team? Right? Who is it asking for it? There's different answers for each one, but those were some of the common ones.
Cool. Yeah, I love this answer of like, figure out why they're hanging on to this, because then you're kind of product managing your own organization, which
Yes.
yeah, I love this meta thing going on.
Oh, it's so meta. Yes. And I mean, I'm with ProdPad where it's super meta, right? We've got roadmaps about roadmaps and feedback about feedback, and OKRs, objectives about the objective section. And I see product and product management as and the process of product management as a product itself, something that can be measured and iterated upon and improved over time. And one of the most impactful things that a product manager can do is learn about their product culture and iterate upon it to improve the way that they work. If they get their whole team thinking about product and working in more lean ways, it's not just the product manager doing it, but it's the whole company. Then the whole company is considerably more effective.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Daniel asks, actually, if you can explain the concept of roadmap bankruptcy once more.
Yeah, sure. So roadmap bankruptcy is just a term that I made up. But basically, think of it this way. So oftentimes when you have started in a new company, you adopt somebody else's roadmap, and it's full of other people's assumptions. And often, even if you made the roadmap yourself, it's full of your old assumptions as well. It's stuff that you thought was a good idea some time ago. Roadmap bankruptcy is just the idea of saying, I'm just going to put this to the side, right? Maybe not delete it outright, but I'm just going to put it to the side and start with a fresh blank screen. Because when you start with your roadmap and it's in front of you, all you can see are the roadmap things that are on there and the assumptions that you previously made, and it reinforces your assumptions going, oh, well, of course we have to do that because it's on the roadmap. And everyone who looks at the roadmap goes, of course it goes in that order, and those are the things we have to do. So roadmap bankruptcy is this idea of put your roadmap to one side and don't look at it, and then get out there and talk to people, right? Do the discovery process of talking to your customers, your execs, the experts in the team around you, and figure out what the problems are, and just start with something really basic, right? 3 Post-it notes. What are the top 3 problems, and put them in order. That's your first roadmap. And then work up something more granular from there. If you finish this new roadmap and it looks just like your old roadmap, then great, right? You were on the right path in the first place, but chances are your new roadmap is going to be completely different. It's one of those things, like if you were to wipe clean your entire homepage and redesign it from scratch, would it look like your existing homepage? If you were to redesign your entire product from scratch and had none of the features and none of the functionality, would it look exactly like how you did it if you knew nothing about your product? So it could be really freeing to declare bankruptcy and start again on something and just remove all your previous assumptions.
Oh, really interesting. It's not how I've ever thought about it in the past, but yeah. Daniel says, thank you for explaining. I actually had a question sort of kind of similar. How do you reconcile this? I think you touched on it earlier as well, but maybe I didn't quite get it. Like, how do you reconcile the time box nature of the OKR as quarterly or however, versus the initiative or goal-oriented monster of the roadmap, right? Where you want to do it based off of a problem or a challenge, but is it simply, okay, we just have these then 3 months to try and figure out this challenge, and if we don't hit kind of what we assume we'll hit, then we move on to the next one? Or
yeah, that's actually basically it. So let's say you've got 2 objectives that are important to your business right now. Reduce churn, we'll call it the pink one, and increase revenue from so-and-so market, right? So you got your churn objective and your revenue objective, and you got various things that are ongoing right now. And these are things that are going to happen for the next quarter, and they've been happening from January. We're partway through March right now. And throughout this, you've lined up a series of experiments. You should probably have multiple experiments per thing, because if you only have one experiment, then you're probably not thinking outside the box enough. You should probably think of other things you could do to try to solve that. And by experiment, I don't just mean feature, because sometimes an experiment is, let's add a feature, because an experiment could be a great way to improve revenue. It could be a great way to solve all sorts of problems, but sometimes removing a feature could be a great way to solve problems as well. And sometimes experiments don't even have to be feature-based at all, right? You could change the way you package your product or you position it. You could change the way that you price it. And these can be often cheaper and easier experiments that you could run. So prioritize these experiments and try to do the quick wins first and the time sinks last. And so you go into the quarter saying, well, we think we got 5 experiments we're going to try. We're going to try to do the cheap and easy ones first. And if they work, great. And if it's mid-March and you realize, hey, we've solved this problem, great, move on to the next thing. If you get through all the experiments and you've solved the problem, great. You don't even have to do the rest of the experiments. Chances are you're probably not going to get through all the experiments. You end up getting halfway through them. Some fail, some succeed. You get mixed results. And you might find that you actually do the top 80% and not the bottom 20%. And you realize that the bottom 20% aren't even worth doing. So it's not so much a checklist of things to go do, which is actually what happens with a time-based roadmap. Time-based roadmap sort of encourages you to say, oh, well, it's March 9th. March 9th is when we start this new feature and it's on the roadmap, so we have to go do it. Whereas this says, did we solve the problem? Is the objective moving in the right direction? We've mostly moved in the right direction. We've done most of the work. Great, move it on to the next thing. When March 31st comes, right, let's say you've done 90% of the experiments, there's still 10% left over. You look at it and go, okay, great, we've done a great job. This number's gone up like this. We've either hit our objective or not, right? Maybe you've hit it. If you've hit it, great, move it over to your completed section. That's great. Hey, we increase stuff. Wonderful. Record it. If it's still important to you, create a new card and say, okay, so this is still our objective. Let's take the cards that we missed here and create some new experiments in here. We're going to spend the next quarter finding new interesting experiments we could run to solve around this problem. If it's no longer the same problem, you would create a new objective and go work towards that one, right? So you're basically outlining all the things you could do and then selectively choosing the best ones and oftentimes just not doing things, right? Because your job is going to be like, hey, you know what? You came up with 10 experiments. 3 of them weren't actually worth doing. And we only realized that as we got close to them and, proved or disproved as we went along. So your roadmap isn't this list of things that you will do. It's this list of things that you might try over time. And, if the time comes and you're like, hey, we're cutting this off, great, cut it off. In ProdPad, we have another column called the candidates section, which is really great because what you can do is you can split a card and say, okay, so this one we're going to put in the completed section, and this one we're going to pull apart and put into the candidate section, so that if this ever becomes a problem again, if the business wants to go back and solve this problem, we can go do the last 20%. But for now, we think the biggest problem is actually this, and then you can sort of go back and pull something back out from there.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
No problem.
We have a question that's slightly on a different topic. Akritis asks, how long before a company should think about monetizing their product?
Ooh, such a good question. I mean, it totally depends. The purist in me, I'm a bootstrapper. So I've never taken in funding for my own personal companies and that sort of thing. So, I mean, I would think about monetizing your product immediately. There are different models out there in the world, and there are good arguments for going for growth and other types of businesses out there. But you should think about the monetization of your product from day one. Regardless, you should always have a strategy and an understanding as to how your business will succeed in the long run. And so you should not be building something that doesn't have a viable plan going forwards, a viable plan for getting to the next stage and somehow becoming something worth the time that you're putting into it. And monetizing to your customers is infinitely easier than getting big rounds of funding. I can tell you that much. To be honest, getting your customers to pay for something, getting anybody to pay for something is the ultimate proof that you're actually building something of value. You know, it's one thing to get people to say, oh yeah, I would pay for this, and something else altogether to get them to pull out their credit card and pay for it. And there's almost no excuse not for not getting that now, because payment systems are so easy nowadays. You know, I remember when I started my first stuff online, it was really difficult. You know, it was like, oh, do I get a PayPal account, and how do I process the payments, and how much is that going to cost me? You know, today you can just get a Stripe account or any other type of, tons of different options out there, and you can be processing payments through all sorts of different providers really, really easily, and be testing as to whether you've got anything valuable that people are interested in pretty early on.
Thank you for answering. This helps.
Awesome. Hey, good luck out there.
Cool. Yeah, we've got a couple more minutes if anyone else has further questions. If not, then we can also, well, let me give it a second in case anyone has some last minute questions.
I'll drop my LinkedIn into the chat as well. If anybody wants to connect and ask any further questions, then feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to meet and chat with other product people.
Awesome, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, it looks like questions are no more. So what we'll end up doing is we can stop the live stream, and anyone who wants to continue the conversation, feel free to come into the Zoom, and we'll just, you know, break out for a few minutes. There's quite a few of us today, so we'll probably break out into about four groups, and yeah, just have some time to quote unquote network, get to know each other, ask about how, you know, you guys do road mapping at your company and all the horror stories. So yeah, but yes.
Yeah, I'll stop the live streaming now. Is that okay?
Yes.